Good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority's public forum about the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, also known as the CWPP. You'll be hearing those initials a lot. My name is Catherine Hilliard, President of MWPA, and I have the honor of welcoming all of you this morning. What Marin Wildfire does is based on science and stakeholder input. We always try to tell you what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and then we do it. And when I say we, I mean all of us together, not just the authority. The countywide Wildfire Protection Plan is designed not only for the 17-member agencies that comprise Marin Wildfire, it includes the entire county. Today's program is the fourth update to the community, and we might call it an overhaul because we've learned so much in 5 years from science and boots on the ground. These findings have influenced our strategies, and we're excited to share them with you now. We started this morning with light networking. Next, you'll be hearing from experts and seeing the presentation on the proposed CWPP, followed by a panel discussion, which includes questions from the audience. That's you. We'll be asking you to participate. So you probably see the little cards and pencils on your seat. But you'll learn how things flow throughout the program. At the end of the panel discussions, we invite you to do some formal networking. Visit the staff and experts at the tables over here. Share your concerns, get answers to your questions, and talk to each other, most important. I'm grateful to have this opportunity for all of us to get together. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce Chief Bill Tyler, who will take the lead. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to see all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Good morning. Welcome to all of you. Very much appreciate you coming out. This is Wildfire Preparedness Month, and today is specifically a day of action, and you have listened to those words of the call to action, and you're here. So I really very much appreciate you taking time. I know there's many of you that are representing various Firewise communities and areas across all of Marin County. And I can't help but remember going back to around 2019, being in this very room. Many of you were probably there at that time, and this was following, some very terrible fire seasons in 2017 with the Tubbs fire, then on to 2018 with the Camp Fire. And we recognized that we had the same risks, and we had the responsibility to do more. And the community called us to do more, and we responded. And so now, 5 or 6 years from that, so much has changed. And so much now is available. There's so much more data. There's so much more technology and science that we've implemented into working together. And so I want to thank you again for coming. And we want to be able to share with you today on this day of action the updates to the Community Wildfire Protection Plan and give you an opportunity through a panel question and answer to answer questions that you might specifically have. So that's, again, what those cards are for. And then we're going to keep the comment period open for 2 weeks following this, so up until the 17th of May. Without further ado, I want to introduce a couple of people that have been here from the very beginning, someone that you're very familiar with that are going to walk us through some background on the CWPP and what's making it current. So I want to introduce 2 people. First is Jason Weber, who's the fire chief from the Marin County Fire Department. He's been at this for quite a long time, and we owe a lot to him in bringing this forward. And also Mark Brown, also retired Deputy Fire Chief with Marin County Fire and now Executive Director of Marin Wildfire. So without further ado, Jason.
Good morning, everyone. And preparedness starts with all of us, and it's heartwarming to see everybody back in this room. Bill mentioned 2019. It seemed like it was yesterday that we collectively as a community were trying to figure out how do we deal with this problem. A changing climate, fires that are much more devastating than anything we've ever seen, really communities being wiped off the map. We don't want to be a part of that, right? We want to be a part of the solution that, brings Marin forward and innovative ways to look at how we tackle this very substantial problem we have, and probably one of the greatest risks we face here in the county. I want to acknowledge one of my bosses and co-chair of Fire Safe Marin, Supervisor Brian Colbert, who's in the back there. It takes, the leadership within our communities to do this. There's also, maybe with a show of hands, because I will miss it collectively, but I've seen a lot of council members, fire board members, others representing all of you. If you could just raise your hand with a wave. I want to make sure we acknowledge everybody in the room, leadership. So a little bit about today, this month. I think Bill covered the fact that, we want to take this opportunity to highlight, engage, and really activate our communities. It is a challenge when, not so much in our distant past that we've had substantial fires and people get busy. They forget about the Tubbs fire. They forget about the Camp Fire. They forget about Palisades, and they move on with their lives. And we have to figure out collectively how we address that. And there's a bunch of QR codes on here that have information. So if you're good at the QR thing or find a millennial, they can certainly help. But really, it's we need folks to access their wildfire risk reports, right? We understand in Zone 0 recently being rolled out by the State Board of Forestry, just how important that first 5 feet is, collectively that 30 feet, then beyond. And when we start to see communities that make adjustments to each one of those parcels, northward of 80%, we start to see our risk really reduce. And what does that mean to all of us? Well, it means potentially we can keep insurance, at a lower rate. When we looked at the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority and the concept and, 10 cents a square foot and what was a reasonable amount, how much money did we need to really activate what was necessary? It's a fraction. And I don't know if anybody's homeowner insurance is like mine, it has doubled now year after year. And as nauseating it is when you open that envelope to find out how much you're paying, it's better than not being insured. And collectively, when you look at the impacts of that, an insurance market that fails in California is a failed economy. And that affects all of us in so many aspects. So this work is super, super important. We must not lose sight of that. And folks do need to engage. So I am so grateful that you're all here, because you really are the leadership, the messengers, the neighbors that are going to make this all work. I also want to acknowledge the amazing team you see from all the different fire agencies. I often get asked, why are there so many fire agencies in Marin? That's a long story. But what we can say is that collectively we operate as one. And I think MWPA is an example of that. When that bell goes off and there is a fire, it doesn't matter what the door symbol is, the patch you're wearing on the shoulder, we do respond as one. And we took that same kind of model and applied it to MWPA. And as we respond to changing climate and wildfire risk, we're doing it together. And I think that's highlighted in the room today. So what is the Community Wildfire Protection Plan? Well, boy, we've had different versions, and I think Bill mentioned that as technology and science evolves, we have to do the same. I don't want to call this a document, and we shouldn't call it a document. It really is a living process. It's a planning process that allows us to all be more prepared. It is required in many cases to qualify for grants, whether it's CAL FIRE or FEMA, Healthy Forests, whatever that act is, we need it in place. But it shouldn't be something that we do and sit up on a shelf. This really needs to be something that community can access, we can engage with, our fire agencies can. Really is a place for all of us to meet and share. It has some pretty intense mapping capabilities that weren't here when we were sitting in this room in 2019. Fire modeling that didn't exist or hadn't matured to this level yet. It identifies our priority for actions, where we have our greatest risks. It aligns agencies, land management agencies, fire agencies, fire-wise communities, HOAs, et cetera, on where our priorities need to be and where our resources need to be directed. As I mentioned, it's a dynamic framework, right? This is a living document. And when you get in there and play around with it, which we hope you all do, and share, your feedback's important to us. It should be user-friendly. And it is a tool. And I want to remind everybody of that. It may be frightening when you see your house in a big red blob, or you're living in a very high risk area. And it also allows us to resource things, but we can't do everything at once. We're quite fortunate that all of you and over 70% of the voters in Marin County felt this was a priority and put up a substantial amount of money and resources for us to start to tackle this. But it's one tool in the toolbox, a very important one. The other is our fire professionals that are going to make tough trade-off decisions around the projects that are identified. What does it do? It prioritizes things across zones and agencies. And when MWPA was put forth, we really, went with the mantra that fire knows no boundaries. It doesn't matter. It doesn't stop at a city limit or a fire district boundary. And our projects shouldn't stop there either. And it really does, look at those priorities globally across the county. I talked about the modeling and the outputs. It's pretty amazing what this stuff's going to do. And you're going to hear more from others that are much more involved and aware than myself. The story map we're going to hear about also. So what does it look like? Visualizing what's occurring in real time. And then a little bit about the process. So new science, as I mentioned, it surprises me every year how much investment in technology and data that's out there that wasn't available to us just 12 months, 36 months ago. As we update this plan, it looks very different than the 2015 or the 2020 plan because of this emerging technology and things we've learned from, unfortunately, all these devastating fires. It gives us that shared operating picture, right? A bigger picture than maybe historically we as a single fire agency or HOA or Firewise community looked at, but that global level, community level, and beyond. And then we've talked a lot about updating those priorities, right? Unfortunately, $20+ million can't go everywhere in a single year, but collectively, as we start to put those dollars into strategy, we can do a lot more with them. And then ultimately, reducing that risk. Fire used to be a very natural part of the ecology here in Marin County. And, as we've settled Marin County and put homes across the landscape, we've had to remove natural fire. But some studies show that fire was a naturally occurring piece of the landscape across our watershed almost every 16 years. And that naturally reduced the vegetation, which kept things calmer and tamer. And when a fire did occur, the intensity was lower. The fires we see today are a result of the interruption of that ecological cycle. They're much more devastating. They often occur under those, east wind events that we see in the fall, and they truly are devastating ecologically, community-wise, economically. They're killing people. So we've had to replace that fire regime with, in some cases, mechanical removal, thinning practices, other items that mimic fire. We're trying to put more fire on the landscape, but of course we have to do that pretty carefully with the resources we have and make sure that it doesn't escape. Talk about climatic patterns. I think we're all so aware that our fire seasons on average are 45 days longer than they ever used to be. The investment we've made in wildfire. I was talking to someone the other day. Marin is one of 6 contract counties in the state. So Orange, Los Angeles, Ventura, Kern, Santa Barbara, and Marin to the north. CAL FIRE pays us to provide like services. And the investment is pretty darn substantial. To the tune of our contract being almost $19 million a year. We've added 4 fire crews, a 5th crew for fuels work, and a much more robust response piece, We've got a partnership with PG&E for a helicopter for initial attack. So that is in parallel with the great work we're doing on the fire prevention side, because those two can't operate by themselves and be effective, right? That's an important piece of this. But I think most importantly is right around your house, your community, right? We all are talking about how important that piece is. And that's not something we can lose in this messaging. That's not something we can lose in the energy. And that is going to take all of us in this room to do. So boy, look at all this. It takes a village, right? We've all heard that, and it really does. And I think, as I look at this graphic, I think what I see encircling that is each and every one of you in this room, each and every household in this community, each and every neighborhood, to really affect success and get us to a level in Marin where we can have a fire occur as part of our natural landscape and not have it be devastating. It has been an absolute pleasure to be back in front of all of you. A lot of familiar faces. It is great to see you, and thank you for being here today. And I'll turn it on to Mark Brown, our Executive Director of Marin Wildfire.
Good morning, everybody. And like Bill and like Jason, I remember the time that we were in here in 2019 with an almost very similar crowd, all concerned about wildfire and wanting to come together as a community and take action. And I'm very proud, I'm very honored and privileged to be the executive officer for Marin Wildfire. Extremely challenging position to be in, but with challenging positions comes great reward. And I can honestly say it's one of the most rewarding jobs I've ever done in my life. But one of the best parts about it is it's, first of all, our member agencies and the folks that we work with at our member agencies, phenomenal team, but it's our communities. There is not another county, I can honestly say there's not another county in the state where the community has come together like this. And it's such a privilege to be working with all of you to help work towards solutions for the wildfire environment that we have now. So thank you for being such an integral part of what we've been doing so far. And thank you for spending your Saturday morning here with us. Take a look at the map and you see the 17 member agencies that we have. And, if you try to deal with 17 different entities, that might get a little bit difficult. And so that's one of the reasons why we subdivided into 5 zones within Marin County. As small as Marin County is, it's still very geographically diverse, and there's microclimates. And so there's another reason for dividing the county into these 5 segments. Novato, built much later than some of the other areas of the county. So we have wider roads, different ages of construction. It's a little bit of flatter terrain and more grassy oak woodland as compared down to the southern zone, where most of it was built out in the early 1900s with Model A's and Model T's as the vehicles that were going up and down the roads. How much bigger are our vehicles now than the Model A's and Model T's that were going up and down those roads back in the early 1900s? Steeper terrain, heavier fuels. We'll get there. And then we have West Marin with much different population levels, much different fuel types. And so by dividing the county into 5 zones, there's no one size fits all solution. This allows us to apply the right mitigation to the problem based on that zone instead of trying to go for a one size fits all. As part of Marin Wildfire, we did a very in-depth strategic plan. We're about to go through an update to that strategic plan. We came up with 5 goals. The first goal was our vegetation management plan. You'll notice it says 2,000 acres here. If you on the sign over here, it says we had to update it to 2,200, and that's just how fast that progress is going. But that is where Marin Wildfire and our member agencies are decreasing the amount of fuel buildup within and around our communities. Don't get me wrong, they are not designed to stop the fire. They are designed to change the fire behavior, to slow the fire spread down, to decrease the amount of intensity, decrease the amount of embers. By slowing the fire down, we give our residents more time to evacuate. Decreasing the intensity, we give our residents a safer environment to evacuate. Decreasing the embers gives our homes a much better chance to survive a wildfire. And then, of course, alerts, detection, and evacuations are so vital. Alerts and a warning so we can get the message out to our residents early for an evacuation, and then improving our evacuation routes so that they are safe for everybody in a car. Right now, actually, this surprises a lot of people. 93% of our roads in Marin are survivable in the car with fire on both sides of the road. And so that is our message to you. Stay in your car while you evacuate. As scary as it sounds, you're going to survive. And then we have a grants program where it's well over $5 million that we have used Measure C dollars to help our residents to harden their homes and create defensible space. That's an investment, a return on your investment. You've invested into Marin Wildfire. We're investing in the community. But then we've seen a second return on investment. For just about every dollar that Marin Wildfire is providing in grant dollars, that resident is providing $6 or $7 themselves. So instead of looking at $5 million worth of home hardened defensible space, look at $35 to $40 million worth of work that's been done on properties. Public education, fire department showing up at your house, knocking on your door and saying, you need to do this because we said so. Does that work? It does not work. That's why public education is so important. That's why our partners at Fire Safe Marin, my biased opinion, the best fire safe council in the nation, the first fire safe council in the nation. That's why it's so vitally important that we have that partnership. They were around since 1992, long before Marin Wildfire. They were a trusted voice, and there was no reason to replace that trusted voice. And that's why they're our key partners when it comes to public education. And then, you know, our tax is a 10-year measure. And of course, we're going to, at the end of 10 years, we hope to renew. But when you look back, you're going to say, what is your single largest success? And I think our single largest success is going to be our residential inspection program and engagement of our communities. I think we'll look back and say that was our number one thing. We have well over 150,000 inspections that have occurred. We've inspected all of the high-risk properties within Marin, almost all of the properties in Marin. And we have tremendous engagement with our residents. I'm going to use words that I didn't say. You know, we had a meeting with the Climate and Wildfire Institute, and our inspection program was called the gold standard of inspection programs in the nation. However, it doesn't do any good if the residents aren't taking action. And more than, after we receive a report, we are seeing more than 60% of our residents take action. That's a phenomenal number. However, it's not big enough. We're going to be asking you guys to take that to the next step. We are asking the residents to understand their responsibility that they have in the wildfire prevention world and take action on your property. We, as your member, as your government officials, are taking action on everything else and providing you the tools to take action. But we do need our residents to take action. This is how we've been tracking and showing and displaying our work. I feel if you are making an investment in Marin Wildfire, we need to show you what you've been getting for that investment. So these dashboards will show you what we've been doing for you. This particular dashboard is our defensible space and home hardening dashboard. This is actually the dashboard for you to show us what you've been doing. This is takes the data from the inspections and then the data that what you've done, and it shows the risk reduction. So that's you guys showing us what you're doing. The next dashboard shows our detection, alerting, and evacuation information. And the next dashboard is vegetation management. That's us showing you the work that we've been doing with your tax dollars. So that's what we've been doing with the last CWPP, because all that work I talked about was driven by the 2020 CWPP. Now it's time to update that CWPP because, as Director Hilliard pointed out, the science has changed so much since we started. It was time to update. First, we have to identify the values at risk. And each of those values have a different hazard that is presented to that value and a different way to mitigate that hazard. So it really is important for us to look at each of the different values at risk so that we understand what mitigations need to come. The science, it's hard to keep up with the science and how much it's been improving. There's been just a whole new awareness in the scientific community about what the wildfire problem is. And it's just so many advances, and Marin Wildfire has had the opportunity to be on that forefront. This map may not mean much to you, but for the folks that are over here, when they dig into their areas, this map means a lot. They see where the greatest rates of spread are going to be, where the highest levels of intensity. We're also able to run fire simulations so we can see how a fire is going to move through the landscape. We have all of our tremendous amount of data from those 150,000 inspections to be able to push into the models so that we know how the fire is going to move. We're also taking into account the robust response that Chief Weber was talking about, not just with Marin County Fire, but with each of the 17 or the rest of the fire departments in the county. And integrate that into our planning. And in our fire road, our evacuation routes, and in what we call our viewshed analysis, and that is our network of cameras on how well we can see into Marin and how much of the area is covered by 2 cameras so that we can see a 50-foot column of smoke. Now, when we know where those gaps are, we can start adding cameras to fix that. This is just, it'll be hard for you to see on this map. I invite you to look at some other maps, but this is some of the new and emerging science. This is called a pathways analysis. What this pathways analysis is showing is where fires are going to move with the greatest speed and intensity. That's those teal green, teal blue lines. The dark green line is our vegetation management projects. And so we're able to look at where the pathways are. We can then design our fuel breaks to interrupt those pathways, decrease that rate of spread with the most efficiency. Because as Chief Weber pointed out, we can't treat the entire county at once. And so this allows us to identify where we need to do our treatments. But we don't just stop there. We analyze the risk reduction that's been created by our work. And if it didn't reach the goal that we wanted, then we're able to adapt that and make it even better. This is my favorite slide, and I'm sorry that it doesn't have any pictures in it, and it's all a bunch of words, and I am not going to ask you to read all the words, but I'm going to tell you why this is my favorite slide. I'm going to start on the right-hand side. Our previous CWPP, the risk analysis, actually punched all the risk into one category. We just had one level of risk rating for an area. That means we had to decide, was this type of risk more important than this type of risk, more important than this type of risk? And you start getting into what we call weighting. And once you start doing that, you start getting into the arguments. Well, I really think this should have been weighted higher than this. So instead, we decided to break out those risks. And so now we divided them into the 7 thematic areas: near community vegetation management. So the fuels right up against our wildland urban interface boundary, the work that's being done way out in the watershed, our emergency alerting and warning systems, our wildfire detection, roadside clearance, evacuation preparedness, and residential risk reduction. So now we can key in on those themes. And then in this middle slide, what you're seeing is for a particular zone, it's going to tell us which of those themes is the highest risk within that zone. Now, this is all relative. Just remember, this is all relative based on other properties in the county. But now we have our subject matter experts that are able to go in for this evacuation zone. This is the highest risk. Not only does it say what the highest risk is, it'll say why. What that risk is broken up into different categories. And so now we're going to be able to zero in and work on the recommended mitigation actions within that theme. The next question we asked was, at what resolution should we be doing this? Should it be at the zip code level? Should it be at the community level? Should it be at the parcel level? What we landed on is that we already have an excellent map of evacuation zones that made sense. So we went to the evacuation zone resolution for those things. And again, that allows all these folks over here to dig in, find out what the highest risk for that particular zone is, and take action. And why are we prioritizing? If you make everything equal priority, then you spread yourself thin and you fail at trying to accomplish every one of those tasks. Instead, we prioritize and we're able to accomplish something successfully here and then move on to that next priority. And that's where I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to invite Jacob Dadman, one of our vegetation management specialists, up to this podium so he can talk about and give you a lifetime demonstration. So be careful, lifetime demonstration of internet. But Jacob's the guy that's going to do it for us.
Yeah, Mark's a hard one to follow. But good afternoon or morning, everyone. My name is Jacob. I'm a vegetation management specialist here with Marin Wildfire. I'm going to talk through, go through and walk through the main public document that we have for you. That is the sort of more accessible version of our community wildfire protection plan. A couple things that I want to say off the bat is that this is publicly available right now on our website at marinwildfire.org. You can go and check that out. I'll show you how to get there. I also have it up on a monitor over there. So after we're done and we're going back to the tabling, if you want to take a look at something more in depth, I can walk you through that directly as well. But I'm going to give you a brief overview of how this document works, of how the story map works, and we're going to kind of go through how we're showing it. So I want to show you first how you can access it from our website at marinwildfire.org. You can go to the projects tab, and then down here we have our community wildfire protection plan update. And then scroll down and you click this link here. Awesome. So I'm not going to read every single word off every single page here, but I want to talk you through some highlights. So as Mark said before, our goal here is to understand priority and risk across the county in the different ways that shows up and begin to map that spatially. Some communities might be difficult to evacuate, but have very good defensible space, and people are really dialed on signing up for Alert Marin. Other places might be easy to evacuate, but they're going to have very intense fire behavior if a fire moves through that. We aren't in the business of ranking what we think is most important over one or another. At least I don't want to be doing that. But we do want to be able to map each one of those spatially so that when those different aspects start to stack together, we understand that this is really an area that we want to target. So I want to talk a little bit through about what those prioritization themes are. And if you have questions about a specific one, we have tables that can address those questions when you go to your tabling. So vegetation management in our open spaces are a larger landscape level stuff. This is things like prescribed fire, larger fuels reduction treatments, things that our land management agencies are really taking the lead on. And this is important. This models not only the intensity of fire behavior and the likelihood that fire is going to get into the community, but also our really important ecosystem services, making sure we have clean and abundant drinking water, making sure that our recreation and the biodiversity that makes Marin so special can still be retained and protected even when these fires happen. Vegetation management near community. This is really targeted towards interrupting the pathway from a fire that's moving in the wildland into the built environment. This is where Marin Wildfire has really specialized our vegetation management strategy, really working on that wildland-urban interface with things like linear shaded fuel breaks that reduce the intensity of fire as it comes up to homes so that firefighters have a better shot at stopping it. And this is of that 2,000 acres that Mark was talking about, almost all of it that Marin Wildfire has implemented is vegetation management near communities. But of course, we still need to make sure that we're doing more and that we're maintaining the stuff that we have. Fire detection, this is largely, can we see fires from cameras? And the vast majority of the county is covered by this, but we want to make sure that we're maintaining and improving that detection ability wherever possible. Alerting is a combination of your cell service and the density of evacuation zones that are signed up for Alert Marin. If you haven't already, one great action item you can take today is to sign up for Alert Marin. You can sign up for multiple locations. Maybe you live in one evacuation zone, your kids go to a school in another, and you work in a third. You can sign up for Alert Marin in all of those. Roadside clearance, we want to make sure 90, 93, 91% of our evacuation routes are safe in a car, even when there's fire on both sides. We want to make sure that we're hitting that other 7%. And evacuation planning, we want to make sure that people have the go bags. They know where they're going to need to go, that if needed, that we have access and we have our temporary fire refuge areas mapped. And on parcel risk reduction, as Mark said, this is where you guys come in. Our defensive space and our home hardening is a critical part of not only your own safety and insurability, but also the safety of your neighbors in your neighborhood. One of the things that we've learned from the fires in LA and other places is that as fire transitions from the wildland into the built environment, that structure to structure spread, it's important that we have community level risk reduction. It's not just, oh, my neighbor hasn't done their zone 0, so I don't need to. We need every single person adding up, and that cumulative impact is what stops these large loss fires and improves insurability for everyone. So this is the prioritization themes that we've been working through and that we've mapped spatially. And I want to talk a little bit about how we map that and how you can access that. So if we scroll down here, we can see, once it loads, a map of the county. And this is broken up by evacuation zone. And I'm just going to click at a random place. So this is the eastern side of Sleepy Hollow. I do hope at least someone here lives there. But this is going to give you a score for each of those prioritization themes for that specific evacuation zone. You can also search your home address if that's something you're interested in. And what this is going to do is it says, okay, look, you're in the 80th percentile across the county for vegetation management near communities. That means that we want to prioritize vegetation management near communities. 80% of the evacuation zones are below you and 20% are above you. So there's 20% are riskier, 80% are less risky. That's pretty high, right? Detection priority, we have your entire evacuation zone covered by cameras. We can see it, that's not a worry. But we want to make sure that we're addressing multiple of these prioritization themes, because as you can see, this particular zone is above median for several of our prioritization themes. So roadside clearance, evacuation planning, but it's not in the 90th percentile, it's on the 95th percentile across the county for anything. So that's one way that we can rank and prioritize evacuation zones across the county that is not saying vegetation management is more important than evacuation, or risk reduction is more important than roadside clearance or anything like that. But we're seeing these different areas and being able to rank them across the whole county. One important thing to note here is that this is all relative risk, not absolute risk. So what we're saying is that someone is always going to be the 100th percentile and someone is always going to be the 0th percentile. It doesn't mean that if you're low down, it doesn't mean that there's no risk. If you're high up, it doesn't mean that you're doomed. It just means that we can begin to, as Mark was saying, prioritize and really target what we want to treat first and then work down that list from there. Another thing that I just want to say, and then I think we can wrap up after this, is that a major goal that we've had with the CWPP is not to create a single objective source of truth. It's to begin to take all these disparate data sources that we have. We've collected an immense amount of data and be able to make sense out of them and be able to bring them onto one platform. So we have a saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And this is I think a really valuable exercise in that, is that we aren't going to say, oh, because you are the 81st evacuation zone in the county, we're going to treat you the 82nd time when we do our work. It's a way for us to begin to contextualize and prioritize work. So if you see something that you think is incorrect, or if you think that ranking in your evacuation zone doesn't match up with your expectations, I would encourage you to take the opportunity to think about why that is. Is it maybe that the model's wrong and that there's a data source that's missing? Or is it that there is a data source that maybe you aren't thinking about? And the point is not to find an answer. The point is to make you ask the question. And then through that asking of that question, we can begin to prioritize and create a strategy for the whole county. So I think that that's it. And then we can, yeah.
Excellent. If I can just invite some of the other panelists up, we're going to transition now into our question and answer panel discussion. I wanted to mention, if you had a question ready to go on the card, if you just raise your hand, and Anne is going to come around and she will collect those questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question, you can drop the card off before you go. Also, we're going to take those questions. We're going to add to a frequently asked questions list, and that's going to be published on the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority's website and linked through other agencies. We also have a microphone that's here in the middle. If you'd just like to ask a question, we'll be able to integrate that in as well. I wanted to just also get a look at, since we've sort of divided up the county into these different zones. So how many people here today are from Novato? If you could just raise your hand. Okay, fantastic. Okay, how many from San Rafael? San Rafael, beautiful. Okay, the Central Marin area, which is, you know who you are, Central Marin. Okay, and then how about Southern Marin? Okay, great. So what I'm seeing is a really good cross section of all of those. And then I did want to also ask, how many are Firewise leaders? How many Firewise leaders do we have? One of the things that's really grown in our communities is our Firewise communities. And we now have over 90 neighborhoods that have gone through a series of steps. They've created an action plan. They understand their assessments. They're working every year with all of their neighbors to try and implement all of these things. And those 90 neighborhoods represent about 60,000 Marinites, if you will. And so we're very thankful for the work you do. The CWPP, the plan itself, there's basically 3 elements. I just want to make this clear. There's a written narrative. That written narrative is about 60 pages. It covers a lot of the topics that we talked about today. It also has written narratives for each one of the 5 zones that are specific to try and prioritize those things within the zone. So that is the written portion. There is a story map that you just saw Jacob go through, and you can scroll through. It gives a very high level, but also it gives you a tool to drill down, not just into your zone, but specific evacuation areas, certain neighborhoods, to see what you can do there. So that's very important. There's also a tool that faces the agencies that allows them to take all of this data that's been aggregated together. And remember, this is a brand new tool that's available to agencies as well. We're still in the process, even though since July we've been at this, looking at the data, understanding. There is still some ground truthing, if you will, that all of the agencies are going through to identify, is this so? Do we understand the data that's been telling us about all of the roadways that have been assessed, for example, all of the data about the homes and what we understand there, the fire behavior, where we expect to have the worst fires? Does it line up with what we believe to be true? So they're going through that process, but this tool, this map, gives you an opportunity to have conversations, either as Firewise communities or as individuals, with your agencies around what's being done. And it allows you to engage. So that's a beautiful thing about that. So I wanted to clarify. All right, so I want to introduce our illustrious panel members. Of course, you already know Jason Weber, Fire Chief for Marin County Fire, Mark Brown, Executive Director for Marin Wildfire. But I also have Nick Brubaker. He's from the Office of Emergency Management, and he is a Chief Resilience Officer. And then we also have Tom Finn, who is a Fire Director from Sleepy Hollow. So could you all give them a warm welcome? Okay, and while we're getting these questions still, and again, also if you'd like to ask a question, there's the mic that's over there. But I just want to kick us off with a couple of things, and I'm going to start with Jason, because Jason, we were here together in 2019 trying to get this thing launched. Can you talk specifically about the role that public agencies play under this plan? What do we expect them to do?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And again, thank you all for being here. The public agencies are the ones that need to carry out the work. And I think it starts with engagement and understanding. Jacob went through all of that. There's just an enormous amount of information there. And so for all the agencies in the room, and what you see today is mostly the folks that are where rubber meets the road. And I know many of you as Firewise leaders recognize their faces. They're with you every day. And this is a partnership with our community. This is not us doing something to our community. It really is working with our community. And I think that starts with an understanding and an engagement, and then, ends with the execution of whatever that priority was that needed to be carried out. And so I think we as public agencies, first and foremost, act as your ambassador and your partner. And then our job is to make sure that, we're taking that investment that all of you are making as taxpayers, and making sure that the work we're doing aligns with the priorities, and the resources are in the right place at the right time. And I think that's our job as agencies.
All right, thank you. When we think about the CWPP, how is it different, Mark, from these CAL FIRE fire hazard severity zone maps? We've got a lot of maps in our CWPP. How does it different? How's it?
That's a really good question. And I'll kind of cover two different topics. One topic is the difference between hazard and risk. Hazard is what is out there. Risk is what that hazard presents to our values at risk. So CAL FIRE's maps are purely a hazard map. It really does not incorporate risk. And that's not a fault. That's the way the map is designed. And it's used as information for our subject matter experts to take the appropriate action. Another part with CAL FIRE is they're tasked with making this map at a statewide level. So think about the granularity that which they can operate at. They really have to operate at a broad brushed approach. Fortunately for us, we have much more finite data, much more granular data, and then we're also able to take that hazard assessment and turn it into a risk assessment so we can start taking action.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thinking about, evacuations, this is a big part of the plan. I'm turning to Nick now. Nick, can you talk a little bit about what improvements or what is in play now with our evacuation planning at the county?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So our office does the all hazards planning for the county. And so we're really fortunate that all the work that's gone into the CWPP, we have an incredible amount of data that's going to inform our evacuation planning. Our office is currently in the process of updating the countywide emergency operations plan that'll be public in June. And one of the first things that we're going to do once that plan is completed is we're going to start working on the evacuation plan updates for the countywide all hazards. And so that's really what our office is going to be focusing on. That will serve as an umbrella document that a lot of the localized areas can start using to start creating their own evacuation plans at the localized level.
Okay. Tom, when you think about, representing a portion of the town down in the Central Marin, area, what are concerns that you hear the public bringing to you that you feel that you want to try and help solve through this process?
Oh, primarily at this point, it's finding out where the information they need can be located. And we rely on the CWPP as our roadmap, but primarily on Marin Wildfire as both the clearinghouse of information and an advisory service to us as to how to implement the changes that need to be accomplished.
Okay. There's some interesting questions coming in that people are really kind of specifically asking about, what do we do about, neighbors that aren't handling what they need to do, right? I mean, they're like, wait, what's in this for me? Like, what's going on with I'm great. My neighbor, Jace, I'm going to give this to you.
Oh
Jace.
boy. Yes. No, we all have it, right? We hear it. And I struggled with a neighbor that had eucalyptus trees right on the line, and back and forth, and who's going to handle, and they're expensive. And, came together and tried to come up with a sharing concept. These are the really everyday challenges that we all experience. I would say though, 9 out of 10 times when we get a neighborhood complaint, when we look at the individual complaining, they have their own work to do. So, but I think all of, there's the fire department and fire agencies trying to make these adjustments. There's laws that are coming into place with like zone 0, but maybe not as strong as we had all hoped. And there's, communities that are aging, or they've got a substantial investment in their home, but maybe not cash on hand to implement some of these things. And so we've got to take a collective approach with everyone. And I think that MWPA has activated grant dollars that do help some of those folks. There's, agencies have different programs if people can't do it, enforcement is so intensive from a labor perspective. Like all these great men and women that are on this side of the room could spend 90% of their time in enforcement, and our action would deliver probably less than 10% of the results. And so we have to balance this with those that can and will, with those that maybe can't, try to help them. And that smaller group of I refuse could take literally 90% of your time. And so we appreciate your patience with it as we try to get them to move. And we look at ordinances and other things, but it's a challenge. And I think, for Firewise communities, peer pressure is an amazing tool to use. So we need your help there as well, and appreciate that question.
All right, you mentioned money. I want to talk about money for a minute. I got some questions coming in here. Looking forward, how much money will be available to homeowners, property owners for creating fire-safe structures and communities? The available money currently is helpful, but insufficient for financially stressed entities.
I'll take that one.
Talk the money.
On average, the last several years, we've increased the number of dollars that are going towards supporting our residents, whether it's through the grants program or a program that we're calling direct assistance, or another program that we're calling voluntary abatement. So the last 2 years, $2.55 million per year has been going towards helping on property. Is that enough? Absolutely not. But again, it is a process of balancing priorities. We are launching a new program that we're calling Ember Ready, and that is to help properties to become compliant with their Zone 0 challenges. And within that program, we're actually starting to reach out with some of the banking institutions, starting with the local banking institutions, to see if we can start generating low interest loans or no interest loans for folks to be able to get the work done.
Okay, Tom, this is for you. Thinking about it from where you sit in your role, what is your desired condition for wildfire preparedness 10 years from now? And what do you think the biggest challenge in getting there is going to be?
Picking up on what Chief Brown just said, I think it's getting people to take action with a gentle nudge rather than a long lecture. And if we can incentivize people and provide them with the resources they need, then we can mitigate the risk. But it is a decades-long process. I've been on the MWPA board since its inception, and I'm amazed at the progress that's been made and how the ability to change strategy has become, or adjust strategy has become as important as having a strategy. As the science develops, as the tools become available, it's difficult to predict where we might be in 10 years, but I think we'll be in a much better position than we are today if we sustain the effort.
Very good. Mark, someone's asking, is Tiburon Peninsula included in your planning? I don't see it in the zone maps.
Absolutely. We're in Wildfire and Tiburon. We're side by side in the creation of the CWPP. Tiburon team is over here for any of the Tiburon residents to engage. And while Tiburon is not part of Marin Wildfire, we are side by side the entire time, not just during the CWPP, but in all of our actions.
There's just questions a little bit more on the technology too, Mark. I think this is yours. So how is MWPA using AI and emerging data efficiently?
There's probably, I think I can honestly say, but biasedly say there's probably not a county that has more data than Marin Wildfire and Marin County. That data is at the parcel level, which I do want to emphasize. We are not sharing the parcel level data with the insurance industry. That's a question we get quite often. The parcel level data is for Marin Wildfire, for our member agencies, and then the folks that we use for our computer modeling. AI is a component of the computer modeling, but we bench test all of our modeling, whether it's AI or not, with our subject matter expertise. But the more data you have, the more informed your decisions can be. And I think Marin County is in a position to make the most data informed decision as any other county in the state.
Jason, this is for you because you were involved with the environmental community very early on in this process. So why ESP, the ecologically sound principles, why are they essential in this effort?
Thank you. I think a quick story, and it goes back to, Sean Martin's not in the room, but I see John with Parks. This inherent conflict between fire and our land management agencies, that we saw it through a fire lens and we felt they didn't. They saw it through a land management lens. It really took coming together and having some difficult conversations probably 15 years ago to realize that these two complement each other very well. And most often when we're looking at a project, there's ecological benefit and fire benefit together. And, it may not be what either of us saw as the exact prescription for that piece. But what we learned is when we do this together and we hear each other and we listen, the end product is by far much better. And I think we applied that concept when we started MWPA. I was also shocked, and maybe I shouldn't have been, because the area we live in, the natural beauty and everybody's interest environmentally, but just how many organized groups there are in the environmental world. And I think it was like 60 plus. And we went, oh boy, we can't work with 60 diverse groups that have different interests well. And I see Bell Cole here and some others, Larry, that we came together and said, can we create, a group that we can help, bounce ideas off each other, consolidate concepts, really make sure that we're hearing the voice of our environmental partners. And I think we should all, I say to partners because we're all environmentalists, right? We share in things like, I think Jacob mentioned, or someone, water quality. I mean, these are inherently important to all of us. So from that perspective, ESP has been a partner at the table, consistently working with that. And, I think our relationship with the land management agencies in this county is so tight. And, I look at our relationship with Parks now and where it was 15 years ago. And, I think it's a tribute to we're all listening to each other. We understand each other better. And the projects ultimately they implemented are so much better because they're doing two things. One, they're making sure that ecologically the things we're doing make sense. And two, it's reducing wildfire risk. So it really is win-win. And that's where we're at. And I think that, moving forward, that has to be continued. And I think it's only strengthening. So I feel very positive about where we're at and where we're going.
Thank you. So, Mark, will this CWPP create new rules for homeowners? Are you giving us more rules, Mark?
No. No, we're not. The CWPP is really a guidance document that provides information for the fire departments to take action and for people like Chief Weber to give expert advice to the policymakers. And that's where the rules will come into place.
Along the regulations guideline topic also, the Board of Forestry just recently released some draft regulation language around what was called Zone 0, the first 5 feet. And so there's sort of a question here, Mark, either you or Jason probably, with that recent release of that draft language, is that what it's going to be? Is this the final, is that regulation you think going to be final?
This is so frustrating for everybody. It's frustrating for the fire officials. It's frustrating for our elected officials, and more frustrating for our residents, because the target constantly seems to be moving. And I'll say it, politics are part of it. And if anyone who wants to say politics aren't part of decision making in today's society, you're probably closing your eyes to reality. So politics are going to play into this, and I don't know what the final regulations are going to look like. However, even when the regulations do come out, I'm fairly convinced that there are going to be different standards. And it's frustrating for a homeowner that there's different standards. And the reason why I say there's going to be different standards is, first of all, they'll apply to the very high fire severity zones within the CAL FIRE maps at a minimum. Some of the towns may decide to expand the geographic footprint. Some of the towns may decide to strengthen the language of what the Board of Forestry is going to come up with. But the other reality is the insurance industry. And each insurer is likely to have their own standards. And so I completely get the frustration. I'm living that frustration myself. Been non-renewed, had to go through the process of being renewed. I am one house away from a very high fire severity zone. And I'm wondering how my city is going to be handling this. And I'm also quite convinced, regardless of what my city says, my current insurer is going to, within a year or two, say, if you want to be continued to be insured by us, you will be zone zero compliant by our definition of zone zero. So I'm sorry to all of you that there's that moving target. And that's why with our Ember Ready team that is helping our residents become zone zero compliant, they're going to ask a question. Why do you want to be zone zero compliant? There's three answers. One, I want to be wildfire resilient. Two, I want to conform to the codes of my local agency having jurisdiction. Three, I want to get insurance. And then our Ember Ready team will help you based on that decision to build a zone zero that meets. I don't know if we're ever going to have a standardized definition.
I think I would add just, the fire chiefs are going to work together to try to normalize this across the county for implementation, because I know it's challenging when one side of the road has one regulation, the other doesn't. So the fire chiefs will work collectively. We're gonna take this information from the Board of Forestry and ultimately deliver recommendations to our elected bodies for implementation. So there is as much consistency as possible. I just don't think we should lose sight of how important those first 5 feet are in regulations and codes and enforcement. We all know what we need to do. And we need to use that momentum to move forward regardless of legislation.
Jason, I'm going to stay with you. There was a comment earlier kind of about the average age maybe of the people in this room, and the perennials, let's say. This is from you guys are asking these questions. How do we get younger people to be actively involved? How many people in the room are under 50? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. Jason, how do we get younger people? What are you doing in your agency to get young people involved?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something we all struggle with, right? We are an aging community. I am not in that group under 50. And I think that the Firewise community piece is a big point. I'm thinking today what's happening in our household. We have 2 lacrosse games, one in Santa Rosa and one in Burlingame. We've got house cleaning to do, laundry piling up. And that's just the reality of life, right? For a lot of those younger families. And it is one of the inherent challenges is how we reach those families that are super busy at this moment in time. But it's also to understand that we do have a lot of seniors in this county. And, when we look at the data around fatalities and injuries on fires, I bet none of you are sleeping with your cell phone like a teenage kid. So how do we reach you in the middle of the night for evacuations? How do we pull together? I just look at my street alone. and some of our more senior members who are in their 80s and 90s. And when we talk about how we can help them, pulling together and maybe doing some work around one of their houses, or I was speaking with someone earlier about, I just don't feel comfortable getting up on the roof anymore. How do we engage our numbers, that are 30 and can get up on the roof and run across it, to help that neighbor that isn't? And then I think during a disaster and how important it is that we're connected as a neighborhood. I know I won't, and my wife won't leave the neighborhood until we know, the Gemini's and the Castons are taken care of. And I think that's the community that we need to focus on in Marin. I think we have the resources and the people that are all able to do it. It's activating those. And it's so important for these Firewise communities, the 90 plus that we have, really to be able to do that. And then we'll get all these kids like Jacob to show us how to use these tools so we better understand the wildfire stuff.
Chief Tyler, if I may.
Yes.
Sleepy Hollow, like many of the other communities, has a block captains program where we've voluntarily asked people to identify themselves if they have accessibility issues or medical issues or other limitations that might interfere with their ability to evacuate or prepare their home on risk reduction measures. And we keep the information confidential, but we believe that we now know everybody who might need a helping hand if and when the time comes. And I know other communities do the same.
Tom, I'm going to stay with you just for a minute here. There's a question about goats in open space areas. I know you guys utilize goats quite a bit. What's your opinion on the use of goats for that open space areas?
They're highly, highly effective and entertaining. They are a pleasure to see every year. They're hauled in from Los Banos down in the Central Valley. We've been using the same vendor for more than 10 years in Sleepy Hollow. And there's the demand for goats, from what I understand, exceeds the supply. And Sleepy Hollow gets a lot of calls asking where and how people can obtain goat grazing services. Our particular vendor has a mix of types of goats that eat different types of vegetation. We've also experimented with sheep. A shepherd comes and moves them roughly in 5-acre sections around the perimeter of our fire district. Sleepy Hollow, you may know, is a box canyon with one road in, one road out, surrounded by miles of unbroken open space. We kind of straddle the 101 corridor and West Marin. So we're at a real inflection point when it comes to fire, and goats provide us with services that no human labor can't match. The issue, of course, is finding a vendor who can bring the goats in when the demand is so high during this time of year. And I'll be happy to help anybody whose jurisdiction might need help in that regard.
And I would just, if I can, really quickly, because I'm looking over and seeing my partner from Parks Department. Goats are a tool in the toolbox, but they also will eat all the native grasses and leave the non-native things like star thistle and other stuff. So when we're looking at a prescription, and we talked a little bit about that, right? From an environmental perspective, we have to look at that and make sure we're working with those. But they're one great tool in the toolbox, but you got to be careful where you use them.
Nick, I want to just talk about evacuations for a moment. As an individual, like how does one really prepare for that? What steps do they need to go through? What tools are there? What planning is being done to help them?
Yeah, I'd highly recommend you go to the Ready Marin website that our office maintains. There's a lot of good information there on how to build a stay box or a go kit. Some very simple steps you can take. The most important thing is that, don't get overwhelmed by the number of things that you think you need to do. Keep it simple. Do one small thing every day until you've got your go bag ready. Make a plan. Know 2 ways out of your neighborhood. I know that's a really difficult thing to do in Marin. I know I live in an area where I got one road in, one road out, but try and identify those other ways that you can get in and get out, and use the resources that are available. Looking at the maps that is part of the CWPP, really get familiar with your area and where your routes can be, and yeah, make a plan. That's the most important thing you can do. Oh, I will say, also just a quick plug. Who in the room, raise your hand if you are signed up for Alert Marin.
Hey,
I love that. That's amazing. Because you're not going to be able to evacuate in time if you don't get the message. And if you don't know that you're supposed to be leaving, the most important thing you can do is sign up for Alert Marin. We need to have multiple ways of notifying you. That's why it's really important that you sign up. You can register up to 5 addresses. So if you have friends and family in other areas, if you have kids go to school somewhere else, but just being in the know is really one of the most important things you can do.
all right, and Tom, this is a policy question for our elected official here. Fire risks are often cited as an argument to stop more housing in Marin. What is your perspective, especially for infill non-WUI development? How about that for a hot potato?
That's outside the scope of my responsibility and expertise. Sleepy Hollow is pretty much built out and has been since the late 1950s, early 1960s. So we don't have a lot of additional housing pressure, but it's a politically fraught topic, and I'm going to defer to people who actually have to handle
I might
it.
jump on this grenade here. The state housing mandates are outside generally the local control of our elected officials. And I see them shaking their heads because this is something that they've struggled with also. And I think we all recognize that we do need more affordable housing across the entire state. And it does place challenges on infrastructure. We're limited to what we can impose on developers related to offsite standards, and infrastructure pieces, because you can imagine, changing a major thoroughfare or roadway on top of trying to build an apartment building wouldn't be financially feasible. And that's the reason state law has changed. I think that when we look at these new developments, generally they're built they have to be built to WUI standards if they're in the WUI. There's fire protection elements that are within the development itself. And then I think it's looking at, working with that developer where we can to create as much fire safety as we can. And then, when we talk about, Mark mentioned that I think it was 95% of our roadways are survivable in your vehicle during an evacuation. And I want to highlight that piece because we do feel pretty comfortable that with early detection, a significant response, and early alert and warning, and people leaving when they need to, we can sufficiently and adequately evacuate most of our communities. There's just a very few hillside communities that are probably outside of that. But generally where these infill developments are going, we have decent infrastructure.
Mark?
And if I could add, it's difficult to argue to add more homes into high risk areas. However, the building construction standards are so different now. Building code 7A, my subdivision, the glass fire burned through my subdivision, 200 feet from my house. Nine structures within my subdivision were destroyed. Three-quarters of my subdivision were prior to 7A standards. Another quarter of it, the first portion of my subdivision to get hit by the glass fire, was built to the 7A standards. Not a single house in that first quarter was destroyed. All the houses that were destroyed in my subdivision from the glass fire were pre-7A standards. So we do have the benefit with new construction to apply those new codes, which is where we're struggling with the built environment, is to bring the built environment up to that standard.
Thank you very much, everyone. So there's a lot of questions that are left. I was going through all of them. There's a ton of questions that actually will be answered beautifully by talking to our agencies and our subject matter experts over here. Things like, what can we do about a neighbor who has very dense, large vegetation growth close to your home? We've got, what are the benefits of creating a fire-wise neighborhood? We've got, I was impacted by the campfire. What about backup batteries for garage doors, hinges and springs, etc.? Questions about technology, suppression, and drones. How do you diminish embers? All of those questions can be answered by those wonderful people that are over there. I want to thank you for coming again. I hope you stay. We'll be here till noon. All of these questions will be incorporated and answered on a frequently asked questions website. Any comments we'll take all the way through the 17th. So if you think about it, and if you think about it later, go ahead and it's cwpp@marinwildfire.org. You can go directly to that email address, and they will capture that. Remember that copies of these plans are available now on the MWPA website, very easy to navigate to. Please share it with all of your neighbors. A recording of today's presentation will be made available as well that you can share. And I want to thank you all for your time today.